Hey Detoxers, I've got a special episode of the Disinfo Detox for you today. I, like you, have been watching all the news media coverage of Charlie Kirk's murder, the arrest of his suspect, and all the speculation online. And I wanted to bring on some experts to help break it down for you. So I brought on 5 experts to break down the different threads of the Charlie Kirk assassination. First, we'll be joined by Craig Aaron of Free Press, who's going to join me to talk about Jimmy Kimmel's removal from ABC. Then we'll talk to Mickey Huff of Project Censored in Ithaca College, who's going to take on the broader wave of censorship and conspiracies in the wave of Kirk's assassination. Then we'll talk to Steve Macek of North Central College, who's looking at the ways in which fear and censorship have been ramped up on college campuses after Kirk's murder. Finally, we'll talk to Robin Andersen of Fordham University and Allison Butler of University of Massachusetts Amherst about the different explanations that are being given for the murder of Charlie Kirk. Everything from the right fighting over Israel, to Scott Galloway talking about the plight of young men, to debates over transgenderism and political violence. I promise you, this is not going to be an episode you're going to want to miss. Last night, it was announced that ABC is pulling Jimmy Kimmel from Jimmy Kimmel Live, reportedly over comments he made about the death of Charlie Kirk. In his Monday monologue, Kimmel said, quote, "The MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it." He also mocked flags flying at half-mast for Kirk and President Trump's reaction to the killing, quipping, quote, "This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he calls a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish." Sinclair Broadcasting is one of the nation's largest ABC affiliates. It sent a letter objecting to Kimmel's comments and pressuring ABC and the FCC to act. Kimmel was reportedly ready to address the controversy on air, but instead ABC pulled him and aired a Kirk tribute. FCC Chair Brendan Carr even celebrated the move by sending a reporter a meme when asked about his reaction to Kimmel's firing. This isn't the first time Kimmel's run into controversy. Back in 2004, he was pulled for joking that Detroit would burn down if the Pistons lost the NBA Finals. Here to unpack all of this with me is Craig Aaron, co-CEO of Free Press. Craig, welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was really serendipitous. I was putting this episode together, trying to get some folks together, and I got your email. It was a recent message titled, "Federal Censorship Commission Reaches New Low in Push to Force Jimmy Kimmel Off the Air." You wrote, quote, "Donald Trump and Brendan Carr have turned the FCC into the Federal Censorship Commission, nothing more than censorship and extortion." Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is an important part of this story. Is the sort of the origins of this move against Jimmy Kimmel. And so here you have this situation where, to appease Donald Trump, who watches a lot of television and apparently doesn't like being made fun of, you have the power of the government being deployed against these programs. So you had Brendan Carr, chairman of the FCC, go on Benny Johnson, the right-wing podcaster's podcast, and suddenly start threatening that if ABC didn't do something about Kimmel, the FCC would have to get involved. In fact, Carr literally said, "There's an easy way and there's a hard way, and it's up to them." So this is the language, not the language you expect from an independent federal regulator responsible for enforcing the nation's laws. This sounds like, a mob shakedown. And that's really how the FCC has been operating under Donald Trump. We saw it with ABC again and George Stephanopoulos. We saw it with CBS and the Paramount merger. Donald Trump picks out an enemy. Sometimes he sues them for some ridiculous sum, $15 or $20 billion. And then here comes his hatchet man, Brendan Carr at the FCC, to launch an investigation or threaten to block or delay a merger or to involve himself in the editorial of the newsroom, or now apparently the entertainment divisions. And so that's what happened. Brendan Carr sent up a flare, and the tragedy in some ways here. So that's bad enough in and of itself. Like, this is obviously not how the government is supposed to work. But the bad part is that corporate media just caved. They caved in response. First Sinclair and Nexstar. So Nexstar is the nation's biggest owner of local television stations, the biggest chain. Sinclair is right there in the top 2 or 3. And they were immediately ready to say, yeah, we're taking, obviously a coordinated effort. We're ready to kick Kimmel off the air. In Nexstar's case, they moved first. We're going to preempt his show. Sinclair comes in one-upping them, saying we're going to stop airing his show. We're going to replace it with a Charlie Kirk documentary, and we're not going to consider running it again until Jimmy Kimmel apologizes to the family and makes a personal donation to Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk's, political action group. So these are the nation's largest owners of television stations. They own, several dozen ABC affiliates among them, all moving to, go after Kimmel, but with an eye on appeasing Trump, right? Because these same companies, they got huge multi-billion-dollar deals in front of Donald Trump. Nexstar is trying to merge with Tegna, the local broadcaster, used to be part of Gannett. They want to take that over. That deal is illegal under current law. They're hoping Brendan Carr's FCC is going to change that. Here they are, lining up right behind the administration going after Kimmel. Sinclair was already in the bag. They've long used the airwaves to push right-wing propaganda. But again, here they are ready to push the Trump agenda. So that's where we are. And then we haven't even gotten to ABC, whose leadership folded under the combined pressure of Trump and these affiliates, instead of standing up for a huge star. I mean, right? This is a face of the network. They just meekly, and again, they've got their own deals in front of the FCC, in front of the federal government that they need approved. And so once again, we've seen when there's a moment to stand up for free speech, for press freedom, to just push back against government intrusion in the media business, something these guys have been railing against endlessly for decades. Instead of doing that, they just meekly fold and capitulate. And that's the media system we're looking at in 2025, which is a pretty scary thing.
Let me ask you one more question about this, because one of the things I like to anticipate on the show is, the responses of maybe critics. And I know one of the things we heard after Colbert, and I think I've heard this a little bit after Kimmel, is this idea that, hey, late night television was on its way out anyways. This has less to do with state censorship and more to do with changes in the business. What do you make of that argument?
Is the business changing? Absolutely. Are they still ordering new issues of JAG or CSI spinoffs and things like that? Sure seems like they are. These are still profitable programs for these networks. They actually don't cost that much to produce. It's a chance for them to push their own celebrities and stuff out. So at some level, is there truth to it? Are they looking for an excuse to make changes, find somebody cheaper? Maybe. But there's no indication any of this was part of these plans for these networks until they found themselves in the crosshairs of Donald Trump. So I don't really buy it. I think there's a very direct line from political pressure coming from the White House, regulatory pressure coming from the FCC, and these giant businesses calculating that this is worth it, that they have more to gain from being able to push through mega mergers, from being able to seek favor with this administration than they do from doing the right thing, from standing up for their own employees and their own people. They've shown again and again and again, settling specious lawsuits, changing content, dropping diversity and equity programs, that there's almost anything they won't do. Now, they haven't learned the lesson they should from the Trump administration, which is when you bend the knee, when you capitulate, they just keep coming back for more. Maybe they'll learn it now, maybe they won't. But they're clearly doing this, and they're not doing it because they've suddenly discovered, hey, we should make a shift in our nighttime programming. They are offering up sacrifices to the Trump regime. And I think you have to look no further than the way the Trump regime is celebrating this to see that they recognize that's what's happening.
All right, he's Craig Aaron of the Actual Free Press. Craig, where can folks go to follow your work?
Freepress.net is our website. Check that out. I also do a twice weekly newsletter, pressingissues.org. Is where you can find that. Sign up. We'll be covering this and a lot of other media capitulation, unfortunately, in the weeks ahead.
All right, Craig Aaron of Free Press. Thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Journalists, academics, entertainers, airline employees, doctors, politicians, Secret Service employees, NFL staff, NASDAQ strategists, and restaurant workers across the United States have been fired or investigated by their employers over the past week for comments deemed insensitive on the killing of Charlie Kirk. Others have been doxxed, some incorrectly, just because their names were falsely posted online. Now, I can't even begin to try and count all of these different stories that I've been going through, but to help us unpack what's going on here, I am joined by Mickey Huff, Director of Project Censored and Distinguished Director of the Parks Center of Independent Media at Ithaca College. Mickey Huff, welcome back to the Disinfo Detox.
Nolan, it's always great to be here with you to talk about things, however crazy they seem to get. It's always good to visit with you and the detoxers, and we certainly need to detox from the authoritarian strain that we're seeing across the media landscape, across higher education, full-on assault basically on the entire knowledge industry and humanities that's going on here. When you were rattling off that list of people who had the improper opinions or made improper statements according to the powers that be, you can sort of just add to that long list of, and coming soon to an employer near you. It seems like everybody's getting into the game of cancel culture. Did I say cancel culture? It seems as though that the people that were railing against cancel culture on the right that used college campuses as a way to show that liberals were somehow intolerant are now the ones crying for cancellation over any opinion that doesn't fit some, state commissar's standard of what the appropriate way to mourn someone is. Which, by the way, is what I'm addressing. I am not talking about Kirk at all. What happened is an absolute disaster and a tragedy, not just for Kirk and his family, but for the entire country and for the state of free speech and for the situation as volatile as it is already on college campuses. So this isn't a laughing matter. But I have to say that the reaction to it couldn't be more cartoonishly hypocritical, which is what I want to focus on. So, because there's no real defense of that. These are the same people, that have claimed to have been victims of cancel culture, that actually have careers steeped in canceling other people with whom they disagree, whether it's professors or journalists or celebrities or anyone else. This is why you and I, when we wrote a book a few years ago called Let's Agree to Disagree, we had a chapter on the history of the First Amendment and censorship. And one of the things that you and I, Nolan, talked about was cancel culture. And we talked about how the slippery slope of cancellation, where we gave example after example of Team Blue cheering on the cancellation of Team Red teammates right over there. We said, look, this is going to backfire. Not only did you and I talk about the Streisand effect, the calling of attention to the very thing that one doesn't like by trying to cancel and censor it.
Mhm.
And then on the other, we just said, hey, turnabout is fair play. I mean, if you're showing the political culture in general that this is how you're going to behave, and you want to get away with it because it's justified when you do it, then it's going to clearly mirror itself later when somebody else is in power. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now, except we're seeing wholesale capitulation, the degree to which we haven't seen since the second Red Scare, arguably. I mean, even in the wake of 9/11, when we saw cancellation of various people, we saw the sycophancy of Dan Rather on the late night show with David Letterman saying that the president just needs to tell me where to line up. In other words, it was like a bootlicking convention. And then later, of course, Rather came to regret that, and he became a darling of the media reform movement somehow by saying that, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Bill Maher, who was still on TV back then, or I should say is still somehow on now, his shtick back then was politically incorrect. And you might remember, Nolan, that he lost his job at ABC because he had an improper opinion about George Bush's phrasing of terrorism, of acts of cowardice. And whether or not you agree with Maher isn't the point, although he made a very apt point that was certainly worthy of consideration, that would be a debatable thing on a news show, let alone a late night entertainment program. So that's where we are, Nolan. You had Tim Carr on not long ago from Free Press, and they've launched something called the Media Capitulation Index. I'm not sure how they're going to scale to keep up to it. It's happening at such record pace. Kimmel is only the latest. I'm not a fan of Kimmel. That's not what this is about at all. It doesn't matter what we like. If we don't have freedom of speech and expression for the views we don't like, we don't have it at all.
Yeah, and let me bring up something too. I got this theory about this wave of censorship. The corporate press, at least what I saw, quickly framed the assassination as an act of political violence, and then there was this fear mongering about this surge in political violence. But we've seen, reporters such as The Intercept had a report recently that there's not really actually much evidence of a rise in political violence. I mean, of course, political violence exists, and I documented it, and you've documented it. But as new details emerge, and we'll see what the trial confirms, the killing seems to look less of like an ideological political violence, say like it's less like the murder of like William McKinley, where it was ideologically driven, and more like culture war, it seems like, where it's about LGBTQ rights. And I bring this up because the corporate media keeps hammering the political violence, and that's where we're looking, and that's what it seems like Trump and some folks in his administration are using to clamp down on the left. But I wonder what you kind of make about it. Do we even have a narrative? Do we have the right narrative? And what role is corporate media playing in kind of aiding censorship here?
Well, the very demand for an imposed narrative in and of itself acts as censorship by crowding out any other competing perspectives based on emerging evidence.
Hmm.
Oh, there's a phrase. Whenever things like this happen, Nolan, these spectacle events or these in this case, let's just call it what it is. It's a horrible, tragic event. When these things happen, the media come to cover it, right? And of course, we think through the lens. Where is the lens aimed? Who's behind the lens and the camera? What questions are they armed or loaded with? Sorry for all the jingoistic metaphors here. But we do have a lot of shooting the messengers in this country to keep talking a little bit more about political violence, as it were. Political violence comes in many, many strains, and whether or not this counts as that is up for people to debate. I think, however, that people are going to at least interpret that because of who the victim was, that must have had something to do with it. So that kind of frame puts it really, I think, favors the wanton speculation that fuels that very kind of narrative of the very political violence that they're asking about. I think something else that is important is that we see there's a lot of attention and a lot of, like, I don't know, like TV crime detective show people on social media platforms that are going to like find the clue that no one did and solve it all,
Hey,
and go down.
let me talk about that real quick because that's a
Yeah,
really
go ahead, go
all right.
ahead.
Let me bring up some of these. So, because I've been following social media and looking at some of these. So for
Yeah,
folks
I know you
who
have.
maybe for folks who haven't gone down the rabbit hole, uh,
Yeah.
there are admittingly some strange details fueling speculation. For instance, we see the video of the shooter coming to campus, and he's got the gun in his pants, and the police say that he had the gun together, took it apart, put it in his backpack, jumped on the roof, put it together, shot, took it back apart, put it in his backpack, put it back together, and hid it in the woods, or that he changed his outfit 4 times. This is causing a lot of speculation online. My personal opinion is that there's probably just misreporting, and eventually throughout the court case, we'll get more clarity on what happened there. But there's that. One of the things that is drawing a lot of attention is that there were 2 people on site at the shooting who distracted police. One was a guy who had a pellet gun. Another is a pretty famous figure named George Zinn, who
Right.
reportedly was near 9/11 or near Manhattan or in Manhattan on 9/11. That's uncorroborated. It is corroborated that he was arrested for a bomb threat at the Utah, I think Salt Lake City Marathon, about a year after the Boston Marathon. But when Charlie Kirk was shot, he started screaming, I did it, shoot me, shoot me." He's this 71-year-old who drew a lot of attention over that. So there are these kind of narratives online, and then there's also one about chat logs about how Steve Bannon on the left and Kyle Kalinske on the or sorry Steve Bannon on the right, Kyle Kalinske on the left
Yeah,
think
it's like,
it's
have we
yeah,
shifted that far? Yeah, go
exactly.
ahead.
They think that the chat logs police have given are like too convenient, and they're speculating that they may be fake or something like that. So that's the kind of stuff that's online that you're talking about, right? So go ahead.
Yeah, speculating versus emerging evidence, right? And we're really impatient. And but when we go to these events, we already have these pre-existing frames, we have a ready set narrative, and then we look to fit everything into that. Journalism is supposed to go and then open the frame and open the lens and find the information and try to begin to understand the story and help the public make sense of complicated affairs. Not continue racing to like have the hot take narrative that's going to be team red versus team blue. As I was going to say, there's a lot of speculation. There's that word again and again and again. What's the intent? What's the intent? Well, and on one level, the intent doesn't, it's moot. It happened, it's done, and the aftermath of what's happening is being weaponized against the left, even if there's no evidence that this is an ideological crime. It's how it's used. We could argue about all the inconsistencies of 9/11 and all the other business. What we don't need to argue about is what was clear. It was used as a pretext to do things that would have not been possible prior, right? We would not have been able to go and invade 7 countries, strip the Constitution, round up 1,000 Arab American Muslims, and so on, if it wasn't done in an utter climate of fear that succumb to totalitarian ways that become codified through policy in the Department of Homeland Security, the USA Patriot Act. That's why we were talking about these things 20 some years ago, right, Nolan?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm pretty sure that you waltzed into a class of mine sometime after 9/11.
Right around that time, yeah.
Where we were talking about the road to the war in Iraq, the lack of WMDs, media propaganda. Well, here we are. We're at another spectacle event, and we already see political factions racing. And Kimmel is part of this. Kimmel was saying, well, it looks like he's a groyper. Maybe he's further than MAGA. It's an infighting thing. I mean, that's just speculation. And, you know, it's part of human nature, I suppose, gossip and speculation, but it's not journalism. And I would also say that Kimmel's not a journalist. So, you know, we should be careful about what standards we're applying. I don't mean that in a double standard way, but Kimmel's a late night jokester. So the idea that you're going after comedians because they don't have, you know, proper reverence for the dead, is crassly authoritarian. But it's certainly been part of Trump's MO. It's something he wants to do to score points to own the libs. Unfortunately, that has rippling effects because Disney also owns other news media networks and other outlets that do other things. And so that's why this is problematic. It doesn't take a genius at ABC News to see what's happening to an entertainer and say, oh, chilling effect. I guess I better watch what I report or what questions I ask, right? This is the problem with corporate, for-profit commercial media in general. And by the way, they make more money the more they wantonly, recklessly speculate because it keeps viewers on the show. They make more money when they say dumb, unaccountable things. Anyway, the whole premediation concept is that we're always keeping the public on the hook for something that we might know in the future that we don't yet know. And it's that very process that keeps people watching, keeps eyeballs on air for advertiser money. That's part of the problem. That's why we need to take a look at corporate consolidation and corporate ownership of media. And in this case, we have, like we did in the Skydance Paramount issue with David Ellison, with Larry Ellison's kid, we have another possible kind of merger and thing going on where it was Sinclair that decided they weren't going to show this Kimmel program after Brendan Carr spoke out. Just like we saw it was the cable companies and the satellite companies that dumped RT America. It wasn't the government. It's censorship by proxy. These companies have material before the government because they want to merge. They want to become bigger companies. This is happening again. We're seeing the same kind of thing happening again with TikTok, right? And the ownership of TikTok with Oracle again, right? It's corporate media ownership. It's capitalism. It's the for-profit commercial model that has nothing to do with ethical journalism and the public interest. And we need to definitely separate those, and we need to focus on who is trying to do factual public interest journalism around these issues. Where are they focusing? What stories are they telling? And asking questions, even like the person at MSNBC that got sacked, right? None of the things that person said or rose as questions were outside the bounds of journalistic ethics. Maybe the timing was considered poor, but more what we're seeing is that it just doesn't line up with the ideological sycophancy of corporate America and corporate media aligning itself with the Trump administration.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, they also, I talked to Craig Aaron in the first segment today, and we're talking about this, and it strikes me that Kimmel's probably getting mixed messages. I mean, ABC thoroughly loved him when his ratings were going up for bashing on Trump, but now bashing on Trump has the ratings going down. So now they get rid of him after he's been encouraged to bash on Trump for like a decade.
Well, good luck keeping up with that game. That's why you can't trust corporate arbiters of something as important as media and information and the fourth estate and the free press. They have other interests and motives that clearly trump, that clearly want to please Trump, but that trump all other principles and ethical values. The Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics should be governing the behavior of these outlets, not political sycophancy and not like which way the wind is blowing. By the way, if you take a look at the long view, and this is what we've argued, and I've seen now a couple people come out. There was a piece in Vox and a couple other places that are saying, look, media capitulation is old. That's old hat. During the Biden administration, don't you remember that a bunch of corporations were all Black Lives Matter and got all woke and everybody was all LGBTQIA plus all the time? We had rainbows and unicorns in the end zone. It was all over the NFL. Target was gay. Everything, like everything. And again, and then so you turn around now, and now that the pendulum switches and starts swinging the other way because it always does. Now these same corporations are, well, they're canceling all that. Now they're not doing any of that. Now we're taking now the NFL doesn't even want to end racism. They'll take that right out of the end zone. Over in Santa Clara with the 49ers, they take down the flags and they're all of a sudden it's not about Black Lives Matter. Never mind the immigrant labor they use there. Never mind how they treat workers in these places.
We're calling
class never gets to come into the analysis there of that. But these are for-profit businesses that are trying to jump on coattails of trends that are malleable and co-optable for profit to stoke culture wars for profit. And journalism should have nothing to do with that. And the independent media is necessary to be fiercely independent and report on matters that the public needs to know about most, that the corporate media simply can't. It's not that it won't. It can't by its own charters and its own adherence to its own self-professed values of the market and the shareholders and profits and bonuses. I haven't even said journalism in that sentence. Yet, here we are. And here we are talking about more distractions, about people being canceled for cracking the wrong jokes. Right? This is part of a larger authoritarian trend of big tech, big media, and corporations lining up at the trough so that they can avoid being regulated, get tax breaks, and continue their boondoggle subsidization.
Mickey Huff, where can folks follow your work?
ProjectCensored.org, parkindymedia.org. You can follow us at those sites. Of course, I'm on some social media platforms, poking away at why they're problematic but useful at the same time. But again, Nolan, we're really getting into some. Unfortunately, going back to Mark Twain, history might not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. It's really starting to feel a lot like the days after 9/11. It's really starting to feel like we can't talk to each other. There's no permissible disagreements allowed. Everything is my way or the highway. I'm right, you're wrong, no matter what, which we learned from Roger Ailes and Fox News and Outfox from 20 years ago. And you can't outfox Fox, but big tech and the corporate media are certainly trying to by lining up and doing what they can to please the current administration. And again, I think we need to turn our eye to the independent press, and we need more critical media literacy education in this country so people are more critical and independent thinkers.
He's Mickey Huff, director of Project Censored, and he's here from the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College. Thank you so much, Mickey Huff.
Thanks, Nolan. Always good to be here with you.
College campuses have lived with the fear of school shootings for decades, and the live streaming of Kirk's death will only intensify those anxieties. But beyond safety concerns, campuses have long been sites of censorship, whether through biased reporting from administrators or neoliberal and conservative crackdowns on Gaza protests. Free speech has been under pressure for years, and Kirk's murder has only escalated that trend, with faculty and staff suspended or removed over their comments in its aftermath. To help unpack this, I'm joined by Steve Macek, professor of communication at North Central College, a longtime member of the American Association of University Professors. In fact, he was a past president of his AAUP chapter. Steve Macek, welcome back to the Disinfo Detox.
Thanks for having me, Nolan. It's a pleasure.
So, Steve, I mean, campuses all have independent and different reporting, and news media only pick up some of these reports. But can you give us some idea of what's going on in terms of, free speech on campus post Kirk's assassination?
Yeah, I mean, so first, I just want to say, I regard, and I think AAUP regards, and anybody who cares about free expression regards Kirk's assassination, especially since it took place while he was at a speaking event on a college campus, as absolutely abhorrent, and as an attack on free expression, right? As a direct assault on free expression, as a violation of I mean, the worst form of censorship is murdering a speaker, right? So we all acknowledge that. But what we're concerned about, and I know the AEP is concerned about, I'm concerned about, my colleagues here at North Central are concerned about, is that the administration very, very quickly after this tragedy decided to use it as a pretext to crack down on what they called, right, this radical left network. What Stephen Miller said on, in his interview with JD Vance on Kirk's podcast, called that, a radical left network, that they were going to use all their resources, Justice Department, Homeland Security, to go after and attack people they identified as members of the radical left. Well, who have they identified as the radical left? Uh, Democrats, which is a surprise to me, as somebody who considers himself very far to the left. I don't regard the majority of the Democratic Party as radical left. The Nation magazine, the Soros, the Open Society Foundation, and other foundations and sort of more liberal leaning mainstream institutions. So it is being used as a pretext to go after um, the left and liberals. And of course, we have seen wave after wave around the country of firings, suspensions, and disciplining of professors who have spoken about Kirk's record. Not who, the administration is accusing these people of celebrating Kirk's death. But I can give you one example. I know of one professor who's an art historian at Florida Atlantic University. I'm Facebook friends with her, so I've seen her Facebook posts. She's posted a lot about the fact that Kirk had a record of racist speech, homophobic speech, promoting misogynist and anti-democratic policies. She said nothing in celebration of his murder, nothing. Um, Her own college president misrepresented what she said on social media in an announcement, and now she has become the target of repeated death threats and constant harassment. I think, as Jeff Lego, the founder of Public Information, said, the right's view is Charlie Kirk was a great advocate of free expression, and if you don't if you don't agree, you're going to be fired, right? That is essentially the stance that they have taken. Now, we haven't seen much of it here in the Chicago area. It seems right now that a lot of the faculty who are being targeted and fired are in so-called red states, that is, states with majority Republican state legislatures and state houses. The most egregious example, I think, recently that I'm aware of, just from reading news reports, is what happened at Clemson University. So at Clemson University, prominent politicians in the state of South Carolina threatened to freeze funding for the university and withhold funding for the university unless the university did something to to shut down faculty who had spoken about Kirk's murder in a way that they considered offensive or problematic. The board of trustees held an emergency meeting. At least three that we know of, employees were suspended, including two faculty members. Now, one of the faculty members wrote something about, it was this guy who was an assistant professor of audio technology and global Black studies, wrote, in commenting on Kirk's looks, that racism and white supremacy age you. And then another faculty member said, karma is sometimes swift and ironic. As Kirk said, play certain games, win certain prizes, right? Both of these seem to be implying some sort of pleasure in the fact that he was murdered, but I don't think they were coming out overtly saying that, but it was being hinted. Both of these faculty members were canned after the college Republicans, and sort of Republican politicians around the state, put pressure on the university. That's a terrifying precedent, right? It's a terrifying precedent. It's the erosion of the political autonomy of the university, and it's a direct violation of the academic free speech rights, the rights to academic freedom of faculty. So academic freedom is not, I think, well understood by the public. It includes, first of all, your freedom to teach your subject as you know how, according to your disciplinary training, your freedom to conduct research wherever it leads and to publish the results of your finding, the freedom to criticize your own colleges and universities and to provide input on things like curriculum, etc. And it also includes freedom of extramural speech. So that means that college faculty cannot be punished for things that they say in their capacity as citizens in the public sphere, right? Ironically, if you said something in the public sphere related directly to your field and what you said was wrong-headed or false, you could be fired for that. So Pam Bondi, who is the Attorney General of the United States, saying that she could prosecute people for hate speech, which is a clear violation of the Constitution and of the First Amendment. Since she's a lawyer, she could actually be fired. If she was a faculty member at a law school and she said that, she could actually be fired because it portrays a poor understanding of her subject. But on every other topic, right, we are free to speak our minds, right, as citizens. And what is happening here is people are being targeted, disciplined, and fired for their political speech in the public sphere. And what they're saying is most of these cases involve speech that is not even objectively offensive, right? It is maybe unpleasant, maybe nasty and mean, but it's not objectively offensive, and it's not outside the parameters of normal political discourse. Remember that Donald Trump, was unflattering of fallen American soldiers and called them losers and suckers because they died in combat. This was in private speech to his chief of staff. That to me is just as objectively offensive as some of the things that people are saying about karma and Charlie Kirk. And even more offensive.
So, I think there's probably some folks listening out there who maybe aren't working in higher ed or aren't attending higher ed or not sending their kids to higher ed. So they may be wondering, why should the broader community or nation be concerned about what's happening on college campuses in terms of this type of chilling of free speech and censorship?
Okay, I have a simple answer for this. A lot of public policy depends on accurate information generated by academic researchers. A lot of what we talk about in the academy, in turn, informs public policy. And if we have political manipulation of the academy and political censorship of what faculty are allowed to research and the conclusions we're allowed to draw, then it's going to have horrific outcomes down the road. Let's just take, for example, if Donald Trump has made this declaration about there being, right, he signed an executive order, declaring without any empirical basis that there are only two genders. Now, what if in fact there are more? As biology seems to suggest, there are more than just two genders. Biological research suggests this. What if, because of this declaration, people stop doing research on these gender variations? they're unaware of them, and then somebody goes, you have to have brain surgery to remove cancer, and the surgeon, because they haven't been trained on the current research on gender, like misgenders you and makes a horrible mistake in removing this tumor from your brain, and you die. Right? That's like a really I always go to the really extreme examples, but misinformation, false beliefs can lead to catastrophic results, can lead when it involves medicine and care for human health, to death. But when it involves societies, it can lead to horrible consequences, social consequences. So I think that's my quick answer, is that we need academics to be free to engage in vigorous debate. So academic experts should be free to engage in vigorous debate in the pursuit of the truth. And if we don't have that, we will not discover the truth, because no individual scholar or scientist has a monopoly on the truth. This is the whole premise of our higher education system. No individual scholar, no individual scientist has a monopoly on truth, which is why you have to have a clash of views, an exchange of ideas in order to discover the truth. But it's important that those be experts, right? This is I think the problem with John Stuart Mill's on liberty. He suggests that wide open debate involving everyone is going to lead to a situation where the truth always wins, where the majority will always embrace the truth. I think history has proven that that's not the case. I think that that's why you need institutions like courts, right? Colleges and universities that have more controls on the conduct of the debate, right? You can't just say whatever you want in a court of law. There's a judge there who imposes rules on like what evidence can be introduced, what reasons are going to be considered valid, and which ones are going to be considered out of bounds. And the same is true in academia, right? Because you have all these people who have gone through and gotten these advanced degrees, their scholarship is subjected to peer review and so on. They can't just say whatever they want about their particular topic. They have to subscribe and abide by sort of disciplinary canons of evidence and argument, which help. They don't guarantee that the discussion will lead to the truth, but they help nudge it in that direction. And that's why these are valuable institutions, these epistemic institutions. And I think our epistemic institutions, the courts, the media, journalism, and higher education are all under attack right now by this current administration, which is why it's so terrifying.
Steve Macek, thank you so much. Where can folks follow your work?
If you Google me, you can find some of my publications.
Steve, you drive a hard bargain the way you market there. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm sorry. I'm not doing the hard sell today. Right.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Yep. Thank you.
It is no surprise that Kirk's death has brought in a ton of takes on what happened. We discussed earlier how the political violence narrative is to be questioned. But what about race, gender, sexuality, foreign influence? To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Robin Andersen, writer, commentator, and professor emerita of media studies at Fordham University, and Allison Butler, senior lecturer and associate chair of communication at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Welcome both of you back to the Disinfo Detox.
Thanks for having us.
Great. It's great to be here as a detoxer again, Nolan.
All right, Allison, let me start with you. There's been a lot of speculation about how gender, sexuality, and age have factored into these killings. Some on the right have blamed so-called transgenderism among conflicting reports about the suspect's roommate's identity. Others, like Scott Galloway of NYU, who I think you're both familiar with, argue that the murder reflects society's failure to support young men. And still there are others who are pointing to this gaming culture, since the suspect was a gamer and allegedly used gamer memes on his bullets. They argue that their youth and gaming might have a role here. So, Allison, starting with you, as a scholar of many of these issues and someone who's writing a book on censorship and patriarchy, what do you make of these discourses going on right now about Charlie Kirk's assassination?
I mean, I think they're actually probably all true, but they're not the only truth, and they're only part of the truth, right? It didn't take long at all for both the discussion of the alleged perpetrator's roommate to devolve into character attacks. We don't know who this person is, but from the I will presume good faith innocence of stumbling over appropriate pronouns for somebody who is in transition to the absolute opportunity to blame any kind of violence on trans bodies, right? Even though this human being, to our knowledge right now, had nothing to do with the murder. I do think that society has failed to support men. I also think society has failed to support women, and society has failed to support children, and society has failed to support our environment. So it's not one singular thing. And I think part of the reason why it is so incredibly complicated is because we live in incredibly fractured times, and gaming is absolutely part of that, right? I don't know enough about gaming to know if it falls under the category of social media, but I think we can safely say that there is nothing social about social media if there ever was. It isolates us, it separates us. It's not new. This isolation and separation isn't new. It's probably happening a little bit faster. And certainly the rapid response to the murder of Charlie Kirk illustrates that. But we can be isolated, and we can be separated, and we can be alone, irrespective of our technologies. So I think what's happening is these things are truths, but they're only partial truths. And they're truths that are trying to find a very quick answer when what we're looking at is so much more complicated and so much more complex.
Robin Anderson, you want to add anything to that?
I would like to say some of the content that we found on Charlie Kirk's discourses. He really targeted Black women as a group. Um, he attempted to discredit them. I mean, he is stereotypic slurs against women uh, in positions taking white slots. I mean, we know all what that is code for. I think also one of the first people to get fired from mainstream media was Karen Attiah, the only Black columnist at the Washington Post, because she pointed these things out. So trying to really censor and take out the dialogue that can counter if you're talking about it from a media literacy perspective, the type of things that Allison is talking about. That happened right away, right? So these things are working hand in hand, and this is the biggest assault on mainstream media that we've seen so far. Where they took out the liberal institutions, Columbia, they've taken out, now they're trying to go for quote unquote liberal journalism, by no means radical or independent. But this is a big step, and so to date, I think it presents one of the most aggressive attacks on our democratic institutions we've seen so far.
And when I was putting together the show, Robin, I thought about your work because there's another narrative that I sort of stumbled into, and we can decide how much we want to get into the complexity of this. But you've been long writing about the conflict in Israel, Gaza, and this week the United Nations officially deemed Israel's actions in Gaza genocide. And at the same time, I think we think of so many things in this country as right versus left. A lot of folks miss that there's somewhat a division on the right about the question of Israel. And Charlie Kirk found himself right at the center of that right before he was murdered. And it came out after his murder that figures like Candace Owens, who, let's be honest, has a loose relationship with the truth, and Megyn Kelly, who often shifts her positions to wherever get her the best gig, are claiming that Kirk was pressured by pro-Israeli forces about a month before his death to soften his views on Israel. They say he was even offered money and trips to Israel, both of which he refused.
That's right.
The story goes that Kirk felt threatened. His friends supposedly have confirmed this. But he was not afraid. He kept hosting people like Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith at events that were really angry and a lot of Zionists. But on the other hand, folks like Chris Rufo and Bill Ackman, they dismiss this claim as conspiracies. They say they were there at this event and that there was no threats made or money offered. Relatedly, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, after Kirk's death, basically kind of downplayed that he ever denied the offer, saying, I spoke to him only 2 weeks ago and invited him to Israel. Sadly, that visit will never take place, leaving, some to wonder. But so a lot of folks online have accused Israel of being behind this. Some folks even have blamed the far right further than Kirk on the right for killing Kirk, which is a theory that's out there. And, apparently this got around enough that Benjamin Netanyahu felt like he needed to deny that Israel was behind the murder. So I know that's a lot I'm throwing at you, but you're someone who's an expert on this topic. What I just described there is basically what I've seen and a lot of people are talking about online. What do you think with what you found in your research?
Well, Nolan, don't forget. Do you recall when Richard Nixon said, I am not a crook? And that just said everybody knew that he was then a crook. That Netanyahu felt it's so important that he came out and denied assassinating Charlie Kirk is kind of a Nixon moment to me. Now, I think that we'll never know what happened to Charlie Kirk. I think that Kash Patel's just buffoonery, where he released this picture of an old, a guy 60s or 70s, guy with white hair, was supposedly registered as a Democrat as the shooter. Like, sure, this guy could hit Charlie Kirk from 200 meters away, which is really sharpshooting, if you ask me. That as Max Blumenthal pointed out, nobody's going to believe what they come up with now. Who did Charlie Kirk? And that's actually, if we think about propaganda, that's a real Nazi propaganda style. You don't really have to get them to believe you, but you need to muddy the water so much that they don't believe anything anymore. I don't know if we'll ever know about this, but what we do know about Israel's role in Charlie Kirk's pulling away from Israel. Charlie Kirk is on record, and Max Blumenthal interviewed his close friend in the inner circle, and Charlie was in the inner circle of the Trump White House. And he was saying, I am now afraid of the Israeli forces, of these pro-Israeli forces, because he was being heavily trolled. And don't forget that at the beginning, when Charlie Kirk was just a baby, 18 years old in 2014, when he founded 2012, when he founded Turning Point USA. He did that with a lot of money from the Israeli lobbies and the Israeli billionaires. So that was an early part of their agenda. And I think you're right, Nolan. He began to pull away when he saw the disfavor that Israel was in among his base. Only 27 of Republican youth now say that they are more in favor of Israel, or they view Israel more favorably than they view Palestinians. He had to have known this. And at that Turning Point confab that he had in July of this year, you can look at Tucker Carlson online criticizing Israel and criticizing Bill Ackerman, and you can see, for yourselves, this is not in contention. They were really coming down. Charlie Kirk's, one of his last interviews was with Ben Shapiro. Charlie Kirk was actually criticizing. He starts out by saying, well, my people have said that we've taken on vaccines, we've taken on black crime, we've taken all this stuff on, but the media coverage and the dialogue about it. But what about, maybe haven't been looking at the media coverage of Israel. Maybe mainstream media is not telling us the whole truth about Israel. So there's a lot of stuff leading up to this. And of course, online, the right wing are going to, and people are going to start, spinning this out as a giant conspiracy. I'm certainly not saying that. I'm certainly not saying that Israel played a part. I'm saying I don't think we'll ever know the role that they played, or that actually who.
Allison, you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I would just echo that, some of what Robin is saying is that this is a narrative that is being used to attack the mainstream or the corporate media from both sides. Generally speaking, I'm usually happy to be on a side of attacking the corporate media. But in this case, I think it's it's a game, it's a dance, and it's one that is using human beings as playthings, and I think that that's really dangerous, right? I am certainly not one who ascribed to Charlie Kirk's beliefs. I don't believe in approximately everything that he said, or everything that I presume he believed because of his public statements, but that doesn't mean that he deserve to be killed for that, right?
Absolutely.
He's got a wife and kids and a family, and I'm sure there are people who love him and loved him dearly. I don't want that to become a game. I
Yeah.
wanna have more complicated conversations, and our right wing and our left wing media, our corporate and our indie media are not really allowing us to think about the complexity of this, right? If his views were abhorrent, which I personally think they were, he's also probably a guy who, like, you know, I don't know, maybe he didn't do his own dishes or take his own trash out, but he was a man with a family who lived in this world. And if we are saying, especially on the left, that you know, it is our job to kind of, to engage in these critiques. We can't. We need to take a responsibility for those critiques and make them multidimensional, not two-dimensional. Bad views, bad human. Not fair, right? And we're cutting ourselves, like to the point of, to the question of media literacy, we're actually doing really irresponsible media literacy if we just sort of make it this two-dimensional thing. So our work is to challenge our media, to challenge ourselves, and to challenge our media to work on that complicated story. I think Robin's right that we're never going to know the quote unquote whole truth or kind of capital letter truth to this, but we can't forget some semblance of humanity as well. I think this is a dangerous place that we're in right now, where we get news of this violence and we immediately see it being spun as black, white, left, right, yes, no, good, bad. We need to slow down, right? And we need to remember who we are as humans and how we can engage critically and thickly through these stories.
I'd just like to add to what Allison said, that what makes that dialogue so difficult is the way Trump and company, ultra conservatives, take it, and anything you say that tries to assess what Kirk said is then weaponizing the charge that the left are the real violent political responsible for political violence. That's not at all what anybody that I know who's criticizing Charlie Kirk is saying, and it's really important to point that out. I mean, if we look at some of the things he said, and the way he said them, there was a fantastic analysis of some of his interviews, which people have said, oh, he would speak to anybody. He was so civic minded. This is an example of really important debate. This is what makes the American experiment great. We can talk to each other. Well, Charlie Kirk ran cameras in front of ill-prepared undergraduate students who were ill-equipped to counter his aggressive, nasty style. They came out looking very badly because he deliberately humiliated them. This is not the kind of dialogue that we need in this instant. And this is what he's being celebrated for in the likes of the pages of the New York Times by Ezra Klein, and people like that.
Let me jump in there, because that actually goes to a question I have, Robin, and you just kind of demonstrated this. So I think there's been a lot of conflation about what's appropriate versus what's legal when discussing Kirk after his death. And as others have noted, some of the criticism at this point feels like an effort to, less like an effort to improve our democracy and more like an effort to, insult the widow and fatherless children of Kirk now at this point.
Yes.
And
prove a point of some sort.
At some point, yeah. And I think, but I also think I'll say that this is just anecdotal, but I think that the minorities on both sides are the loudest in this one. I think most people hopefully I wish that most people can see the humanity here. I think we're listening to the furthest voices who are minorities, but I think there's an important distinction between critiquing Kirk, the individual, which, at some level may not be as important in this point, and critiquing the deification of him, which is where they're putting him on this martyr, this champion of free speech. And I came across this in a debate on the Bad Faith podcast with Brianna Joy Gray and Zed Jelani, two people who I listen to a lot. And, Gray argued that while she considered Kirk a racist, she didn't feel compelled to bash him after his death. What really troubled her was once he was getting deified. She thought that, this was wrong. She pointed to that same Ezra Klein article where Ezra Klein said, Kirk debates the right way. And Ta-Nehisi Coates agreed with Brianna Joy Gray on this. And critics pushed back, just like Robin did there, saying that, yeah, he relied on insults and glibness and rather than substance. And he engaged in sexism and racism during debates, as Gray notes. And he kept a list of professors, which is like McCarthyite, has a chilling effect on free speech. So can you guys talk about the distinction between hammering this guy after he's dead as a way to insult his wife and children is, inappropriate. I think you agree with that. But, there's also a problem with kind of deifying this guy and using him as an example that'll then inspire others to engage in this kind of problematic debate behavior. Do you guys agree with that? And can you unpack that at all? Allison, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we deify him, to your point, he has lists of professors. He also has lists of K through 12 educators. When we pay attention to the deification of him, when we pay attention to those who have a really large platform, Ezra Klein, to talk about this deification, my question would be, what aren't we paying attention to, right? And what we aren't paying attention to is that when he has this list of professors and when he has this list of K-12 educators, and to Robin's point, when he kind of comes after college students who are unprepared because they're college students, it works as a chilling effect. It works as a silencing, and then it makes it that much easier to deify him. See, he went to college campuses. He invited college students. But what we do in our classrooms is to work with our students. Tell me something uninformed. Tell me something you don't know much about. Ask questions. Let's see what we can learn together. I would go so far as to say dumb things, because, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as we enter into class, we enter into college, we enter
I
into
say dumb
K-12.
things.
Yeah, I say dumb things all the time, right? But we enter into these spaces to learn, right? We enter in not knowing, and we enter in with at least one goal is to know more. And fundamentally, learning is difficult, right? It takes us out of what we know and moves us into something we don't know, and that is challenging. Attacking somebody while doing it on a large public sphere is not educative. But the more that we have that high platform from both Charlie Kirk and his company, as well as the folks that, again, in good faith, seem to be trying to speak positively about the public figure, is it also operates as a chilling effect. I don't want to be attacked. I'm scared of my lack of information. Therefore, I am going to speak less. And what we then get over time, like sedimentary layers, is a quieter, more docile, more demure society that doesn't know how to ask questions. And that, I think, is really dangerous.
Right.
Robin?
I think also what we're experiencing in the last few days is the closing down of just to change a little bit. I want to say I agree with everything Allison says. I think in service of that simplified kind of discourse, that's humiliation versus, the shining intellect, is the weaponization of it's important for us not to criticize the things that he said, because they're turning this narrative completely around on its head 180 degrees and using it to actually weaponize political violence, right? So by presenting him, deifying him, and presenting him as the shining beacon, of a kind of fair, reasonable dialogue, it's kind of deliberate, because because it's in the purpose of blaming any kind of progressive, any kind of quote unquote this anarchistic fascist left that Trump keeps talking about. So ironically, it's weird. Where, as Mondoweiss says, if you want to attack political violence, if you want to really challenge political violence, stop arming Israel. I mean, there's political violence. We're steeped in it. We're just rolling around in political violence. And now for Trump to be able to use this Charlie Kirk narrative to turn that around and deny it, that this is coming from the forces of authoritarianism, of ultra-rightist, of the long, trajectory of gun and military and law and order kinds of culture. I mean, if you think of what Charlie Kirk said about gun control, he actually said just before he died, it's worth it to have a few gun deaths so we don't lose the Second Amendment. He became a victim of his own rhetoric, of what his ideology. And that's what we're seeing writ large now. And God forbid anybody should point out little points in which that narrative doesn't make sense, because of all of the way that we're grieving and our thoughts and prayers go to Charlie, this wonderful, now this saint. When Jimmy Kimmel goes so far as to point out, when somebody asks Trump, "Oh, your King Majesty Trump, how are you holding up with your grief about Charlie Kirk?" And he goes, "Oh, fine." And then he points over to the construction on the White House thing. "And look, we're doing this great thing now where we've wanted this big ballroom for 150 years."
How are you holding up over the last 3.5 years? I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks. They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years.
And now we're getting it. So I just want to point out that that's happening. And it's like, and so Jimmy Kimmel points that out, makes fun of what happens to him. He gets fired because his owners, at Sinclair and Nexstar are trying to do a deal with the FCC. You get the FCC head coming out and saying, "Yeah, this is really, really bad that he did this." So these authoritarians in power now they're closing down any real dialogue where we could come to terms with this in a more complex narrative. They're silencing anything that is being said about Charlie, and now they're silencing the comedians. And what we know from comedy is the authoritarian hates to be mocked. He doesn't want to be laughed at. He doesn't want anybody laughing, and he doesn't want in particular to be laughing at him. So, it's part of a larger kind of complex things that's happening now, really, which is really scary, I think.
So as we wrap up here, I was wondering, both of you are two, of the most media literate people I know who stay up to date on these things. You got any tips, any do's and don'ts from folks as they're kind of battling through this Kirk situation and information and watching censorship? Any do's and don'ts you might recommend to folks?
I mean, I think we live in a time where we are just being bombarded with a quantity of information, and each time something new happens, something else happens to distract our attention. I think it is really hard to stay focused, and I put myself in that as well. Like, I have a hard time staying focused. I have a hard time reading or listening to a singular story because I feel like there's just so many other things coming in. So I would say part of our work right now might be to kind of counter that onslaught. This might be a time where less is more. I'm not saying to not pay attention, but look at what and how we're asked to be paying attention, and nobody has that kind of time, that intellectual, cognitive, or emotional bandwidth. So what happens when we are just thrown, right, this fire hose of information? It means that we don't actually learn all that much. So what can we do to protect ourselves a little bit? Find sources, maybe singular sources or authors, or something that we can kind of focus on. Choose a thing, right? Headlines might be what you pay 98% attention to, but what is it that you actually need to want to deeply are invested in learning more about, the onslaught is unsustainable. We're 9 months in, right? I think that's something that I keep saying that to myself over and over again. This is less than a year, right? This administration has asked the Supreme Court for direct support more times than the entire Biden administration or the entire Obama administration. There is no pause. Maybe we have to, I don't think it should be entirely on us by any stretch of the imagination, but at least for a moment, maybe we kind of pause ourselves to make sure that that we can actually focus on what we're trying to focus on.
Robin, you got anything?
Sure. I would say try not. It's hard to find a happy medium where we can be critical and point out important aspects that we pull from this political discourse now, and not descend into a polemic. And to keep it complex without making it perfunctory, like, I don't agree with killing anybody for their words. I mean, we kind of feel like people feel compelled to say that. Then you say that. Then you go off and say, a whole lot of dumb things. but I always marvel at Allison, because really, Allison, you talk about this better than anybody I've ever heard.
Thanks. I feel that way about you, Robin.
You talk about how
I feel bad we weren't recording there. I'm kidding.
Well, we're detoxing now. You talk about the complexity of all kinds of issues in such a humane and insightful way that I never failed to marvel at it. But the other thing I say, when you were talking about distraction, we can't let this whole thing all consume the things we're thinking about or writing about. I mean, I hate to be a one-note person, but they are currently wiping out the rest of the people in Gaza. They are currently starving them to death. They are currently making upwards of 1 million people leave Gaza City now after they destroyed everything. I mean, this is horrible. And I wouldn't put it, I think they know what they're doing with this. I think they know this is a distraction. We got too many fronts going on that we can't stop the real political violence that now we're being charged with promoting. So that's my word of.
You two are the best. Thank you so much. Allison, where can folks follow your work?
I'm pretty easy to find at UMass Amherst, and relatively soon will be from the Censored Press, my text on gender, the judgment of gender, how pop culture centers and silences women. Certainly one of the things I'm thinking about after that might be how pop culture constructs and destroys men, too.
Wow. That's a much better answer. That's a much better answer than Steve. Steve said you can just Google me. Robin, where can folks follow your work?
Well, I've got a book coming out really pretty soon. It's called The Complicit Lens, or Books, and the Institute for Palestine Studies is publishing it. It's called The Complicit Lens, U.S. Media Coverage of Israel's Genocide in Gaza. So that should be out pretty soon. And I'm on various places, most frequently these days, I guess, on Counterpunch. I've got a piece coming out about, our favorite New York mayoral candidate, Zoran Mamdani, and his videotapes, which were really terrific and upbeat, and I believe do offer us with an alternative on how to do political engagement and political discourse. So look for that.
Well, great. Check those out, and we'll definitely have both of you back on the program. And thank you, Detoxers, for tuning in. Be safe out there. And if you want me to keep bringing you content like this, click on the Patreon link in the description. For as little as $5 a month, you can help support the show. It really makes a big difference. But if you don't have that kind of money, no big deal. Like, comment, follow, and subscribe. If you do that, it really helps bring the show to more people.